think what we need to like do for this is like we need to make it clear that like we're on our journey, like we have experience across the board, but like we're on a journey trying to figure out how to do this. And like we want to share that, like we want to open that journey up a little bit to the public.
That is 100% the vibe of what's going on right now. We're just like lifting the veil a little bit into our process. I think that's what, I think that that's the most useful thing we can possibly do. But yeah, should we chat about this, like finish this opium conversation?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So this is the one, this is like the ultimate, like, so this is what I like about this piece is that I just think like a QR code is really graily. Like I think this is like one of the only opiums that exists that doesn't have English words on it. And I've
Does the
never
QR
seen,
code say anything?
what's funny? I don't know. And I don't even know if it would work because it's so blurry. I mean, I can test it right
Let me
now and see
try
if
it. Yeah.
it actually works. Oh, it goes to ordinals.com.
Awesome. I knew it had to go to something. I fucking love it.
Oh, wait. Oh, wait. It goes to a specific inscription. It goes to a sound inscription of a honk. Inscription 2042. Okay, so like this is like, yeah, I'm gonna just buy this. Do you think I should just pay the full price? I put
Is
in the
this for
offer
the fund or for you?
for me. I wish I could get it for the fun, but I'm like, I can't sell. I mean, like, yeah, I can't.
Well, and what I've noticed with opiums, and take this with a grain of salt, of course, because like this is just like something I'm surmising and may not actually be like the case. But I've been watching these a lot. And these two, 54 and 123, which is the it's bad bitch a clock. Yeah, it's thick 30, and Bitcoin is a computer. Those look to me like they're in the hands of like perennial flippers. Like they're constantly on the floor and they're
Little,
constantly getting traded for like little like
little shreds of
scalps. And like what I think is going on is like those are getting underpriced from the rest of the collection potentially. Um, so it's like maybe one way to potentially think about it is once somebody does finally scoop those and they're gone, like you're already up to 0.48, Isabel. And like those are kind of like anomalous, is what I'm saying. It's like nobody fucking wants those.
I mean, this is the point. I mean, I don't want them. Like, I don't like them. Like, I mean, we can go, let me just like show really quickly. Yeah. So, like, so first of all, I don't. So, okay. So let's talk about the things that I like about the QR code. It has no English words, which is like super unusual for opiums. It's got to be one of the only pieces in the collection that doesn't have English words on it. There was a tattoo artist that I followed a long time ago that I really like. And he said he wouldn't allow any of his clients to get letters or word tattoos. He would only do pictures. He said lettering is littering. And like there's just something very like clean about pieces of art that don't have words on them. Not that words aren't cool in their own right, but it's just special that it doesn't have English on it, in my opinion. I think it might actually have a little English on the can, but it's like kind of cut off. QR code is so cool, such a moment in time. One day, I wonder if a QR code will be like a vinyl record. Like who knows what the technology is going to be like in the future? Like, will QR codes be relevant? I don't know. Um, but I also like that it's not totally crude. Like, I mean, he's smoking a cigar, but like, other than that, like the thing that's, again, for better or for worse about this collection, it's super crude, right? Like, super, like, strong language, like drug references, all the things. I kind of like that this piece doesn't have to do that. And it's still awesome, you know?
Yeah, that's a very good
Um,
point. I've noticed that the crude ones sell really well.
They do because the people who are interested in this collection like crude, right? Like this collection attracts crude. But I think that there are a lot of people who don't. I think like a mainstream audience, there's a lot of people who would, on the same token, not buy something because it could go either way. I think crude can go either way.
And it goes back, it's funny because like we're talking about like letting people into our process a little bit. We just sent out our first um, investor report to our investors. The fund is only 2 quarters old. And one of the things that Isabel and I talked about was like the fact that puppets and opium and this whole collection, like it definitely has a perception that could potentially be negative. And like we just need to be aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could go either way. This was also came up with like somebody else that I was sort of brainstorming about was, yeah, I mean, and I think we could maybe talk a little bit about like the NodeMonkes puppets war that's happening. Um, you know, it's kind of bullish and bringing attention to both puppets and NodeMonkes. On the flip side, puppets are a lot of the like puppets folks are really getting into the habit of dissing a lot of other Ordinals collections, including, by the way, Quantum Cats and Ordinal Maxi Biz. And that also is a strategy that could go both ways, right? Like it's a flex and on the one hand, but it also could piss people off and make people angry and not necessarily be super bullish long term.
Totally. No, and I think what that creates a dynamic where um in markets it's like you don't want huge groups of people rooting against you. And like basically what that does is it creates enemies among all the other communities, so that when puppets is down, which of course it inevitably will be, everything always is down at some point, it's like everybody will use that as an opportunity to kick them, which could hurt them. um so I mean,
Okay.
I definitely agree. Do you want to maybe give a little background, because I think your like understanding of like the history between puppets and NodeMonkes, I think it's honestly it's like really interesting.
So I first became aware of puppets pretty much. I mean, I don't remember like the very, very first time they entered my consciousness, but one of the first moments that I vividly remember becoming aware of puppets was, sort of in an alpha group with Node Toshi and a bunch of sort of diehard Monks fans that were made it very clear that they saw puppets as some kind of, threat in some way or competitive in some way. And that I vividly remember happening, in early January. That was sort of like a narrative that was happening amongst like a small group of sort of diehard NodeMonkes people that I was, in circle with. And as I sort of dug into the history of puppets a little bit more deeply, um, it became, yeah, it sort of, what we learned was that, kind of, I believe that puppets did launch the same week as NodeMonkes. And I can understand why they would have been potentially seen as a little bit competitive at the time. And there's a few key reasons for that. So number one, I think that they launched the same week. Number two, there were a lot of challenges, as was very visible in public at the time of the NodeMonkes launch, with the just the launch mechanism that the NodeMonkes team used. They were supposed to initially be a fair launch, and then they publicly changed their minds. This was really controversial. People were angry about it. And, right up on the heels of this other collection, puts out this free or substantially cheaper mint called Bitcoin Puppets. And Bitcoin Puppets was, in addition to kind of, I think, being like a little bit more accessible than a node, like a 10K that, still a 10K collection that was more accessible than NodeMonkes. Um, my impression is that Bitcoin Puppets had somehow managed to rally like large groups of Ethereum holders, right? And around that time that NodeMonkes was kind of coming onto the scene, that was the first time we really saw droves of Ethereum NFT collectors getting into Ordinals. And I think that may have been because Ethereum holders felt like they had missed the early inscription meta boat, and NodeMonkes was sort of giving them an opportunity to get back into that meta. But again, around that same time, there was this sort of like entanglement with this other collection that was doing a, fairer mint or more accessible seeming mint next to the NodeMonkes mint, which at the time was having a lot of, challenges and comms issues, and just, yeah, kind of a little bit of a train wreck of a launch.
Yeah,
So
changing distribution, things like that.
exactly. So I think, yeah, so I mean, like I didn't pay, I mean, and I remember like, after that launch, both collections were kind of quiet for a little while. I mean, like NodeMonkes actually went down, I believe, after Mint. There was like a moment in time where I think NodeMonkes were as low as like 0.03 or something. Um, and yeah, and then like there was, there wasn't like a huge ton of noise about it for, let's call it like the month of January. And then I guess, I mean, I started to hear kind of whispers about, puppets and NodeMonkes kind of climbing in sync in like February. Puppets was cheaper than NodeMonkes pretty much always, but not by much. And then you had NodeMonkes, what, maybe a month ago, go on like a crazy tear up to like 0.9 Bitcoin, retrace dramatically. We've been like chilling between 0.4 and 0.6 for several weeks now. And that whole time that NodeMonkes has been correcting, Puppets has been slowly, hauling up and up and up and up, pretty much. I mean, they haven't had like a major NodeMonk style correction. They didn't have a big swing up the way NodeMonks did either, but they've been kind of chugging up since then. I think I'm getting this history right, just based on my memory.
So the only part I don't remember for sure is that how high it went, but I think the rest is definitely right.
NodeMonks definitely went to 0.9.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, but like we're at all-time highs with Puppets, and last week or whatever, in the past week we've reached new all-time highs for Puppets and opiums.
And
Oh,
Puppets right now are trading at 0.39, which is just, it's been a phenomenal rise.
so you don't think paying 0.48 for like a graily opium is like a horrible decision?
So I have two thoughts on it. One, like, this is a personal holding.
Choice.
This isn't going into the fund. So I think you can like be a little bit more like skewed towards your personal preferences based on that.
Yeah. I want to
Also,
make good financial decisions. It's
yeah.
all practice.
Also,
It's all
like I
learning.
said, like I don't think it's that overpriced. Like the two that are cheaper are two that seem like they've been getting knocked around a lot by scalpers that are just trying to make a quick buck on them. Um, and I think that the price is likely to settle. Like what you're not seeing is you're not seeing a whole bunch of people coming in and undercutting those two. So like it makes me
Right.
not super worried about paying a little bit over that. The other consideration that I'd make, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, is like anything that gives you, from my perspective at least, like additional conviction to stand by your decisions, I actually
Yeah.
think is really helpful in the long
Yeah.
run. Because the hardest part about this is always, at least from my perspective, like holding through when you're getting just absolutely destroyed. And like if you love the piece and if you love the collection, you're just not going to care that much.
It's funny because the piece that I sold in order to get the liquidity for this acquisition was a NodeMonk that I bought on the floor that I didn't love. And I was like not that excited about this particular NodeMonk. And if it was like a super NodeMonk that I thought was like super graily, I might not sell it for an opium. But I'm like, this like NodeMonk that I kind of feel like is a floor NodeMonk versus like a Grail opium. Like there's a chance that a Grail opium outperforms a floor NodeMonk. Like, will puppets outperform NodeMonks in general? I'm not going to bet on that. But like a Graily opium versus a floor NodeMonk, that's like more of a fair trade.
I
Do you
I
buy
I
that?
totally agree, and I also think that the collections are fundamentally different in the sense that like I think not puppets, I'm sorry. I think opium is a collection of grails.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think it's because of that, it's going to have lower liquidity and it's also going to trade less like a commodity.
Yeah. 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 And just for like, I don't know if we like fully got into like what opiums are, but like just for context on like what opiums are. So opiums are a collection of 777 original kind of puppet inspiration series that predates the 10K puppet series. And they're much more detailed. They have many, many more like sort of unique traits in that collection. And they're earlier, right? I mean, they were the original collection upon which the puppets ultimately are a derivative. The 10K puppets ultimately are derivatives of opiums, not the other way around.
And
So I find them pretty special.
I agree, and you know, to share a little bit um on our strategy, you know, because of what you just described, and because our view has been that opiums are not, they're underpriced relative to puppets. There's, you know, 10 times as many puppets. But yet the price has been, they've been trading a lot closer in price than one might think, given how much rarer the opiums are and how much more graily they are.
Exactly.
So, you know, the fund does, Unbroken Chain does hold some puppets, and we're going to continue to, but the strategy that we've had up until now is that basically we're trying to hold 1% of the opium supply as our puppets exposure. And our view on that is that if puppets performs, you know, opiums will outperform them. At least that's what we expect.
Yep, totally. Okay, so basically, like TLDR, you feel like that's like not a bad trade.
No, I don't. I think it's a good trade. And I
Okay, good.
like talking about things like this. I think it's good because it brings up all these like little points that are in my mind that I'll never think to, you know what I mean? It's like I need to go through a process to like even think about it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Okay, so I'm just gonna like, I put in a bid that they haven't respond to, but your point of view is like, it's like kind of not a big deal if I just pay the 0.4875. And like,
So
I'm a
my view
little,
is that the floor is already basic. So not only, so a couple things. I think the floor is basically already what you're talking about. I think these two pieces are it's like a weird anomaly. So somebody just bought one above floor. Do you see it?
okay, no,
0.48. This is what I'm saying. It's like they're just skipping.
0.48.
Yeah, they're just skipping.
Did they, is that the one, did I just buy it? Just,
Oh yeah, you did.
I am just, I hope that somebody else didn't just take it. I hope it's me. Let me see. I think I bought it. Yeah,
Make
okay.
sure.
I just bought it. It's me. It's me. Okay.
I mean,
Okay, cool.
I can snipe it if you need me to. I have that right here.
This is a no, no, no. This is yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it says me. We're good. I got it. Okay. So I got an opium grail and I got it for less than I paid for a shitty floor node monk. So I think that that's a reasonable trade and also it diversifies me. I mean, like I was just like overweighted on node monks versus this, let's call it the puppet opium situation, is what I would say.
So
I'm
last,
still overweighted NodeMonkes, relatively speaking. I'm still ultimately like a heavyweight on NodeMonkes personally, but like I wanted a little bit more diversification into this puppet opium situation personally.
I actually don't really dislike Opium 123. I might just buy it.
I mean, the floor opiums, if you don't mind the floor opiums, like like here's the thing is I do think it goes 0.43, 0.44, then the 1.48, which I just bought, and then it goes into 0.5s. And like, I don't like no one's putting more on the floor right now. Like, I think once those point fours
That's
are
what I was saying is no one's
over,
undercutting the price
I think
anymore. It's
it's
done. The
over.
selling's done.
You might as well just grab those two because I do think once those two are gone, like point four opiums are like a thing of the past, potentially.
I know. I don't really like the bad bitch o'clock one though.
I am a woman, so I can talk about this, but I don't like first we know that woman references don't do as well because they're PFPs in a male dominant environment. That's just like the reality of the situation. It's just demographic reality, right? It's like you
I
have
think we should put that in. I think we should talk about it. It
I
sucks.
think
The truth is so the thing is we're not talking about our preferences. We're talking about like making money.
we're talking about the reality of the markets. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like this is the reality of the market is like you have a bunch of men who by and large the supply dynamics are impacted by people who are buying into these types of collections because they want to make them PFPs. Men don't want to make women their PFPs by and large, right? It's not that complicated. Like these are identity like issues, right? So
100%.
why would you and what's interesting is like as an artist, I often like am curious about artists' decision to put lots of women into a collection that they are trying to sell to a market of men.
I totally think it's a weird call to do it that way. And I think the other piece that's sort of interesting about this dynamic is because of exactly what you just explained. Most projects and most collections are aware of that, and they've actually included less female pieces within their collection. Well, what that does is it basically creates like a potential supply issue in the future if women do actually come to the table and start wanting to own this shit. They might never, which is the reality. This might just be like a nerdy dude thing. But if women do start like wanting these things as their PFPs, the reality is collection like artists have not created enough for them. So there actually weirdly might be more upside there, even though they're underpriced right now.
And the other thing that I think is really smart is like, so you have puppets, which, as far as I'm aware, I've never seen any women puppets in the actual puppets collection. But then you have Pupettes, which is an exclusively female collection, obviously like trades at a substantial discount. It's like super cheap to get a puppet. But like women are excited about the puppets collection. So women who want to support puppets, like I have a puppet as my PFP. It doesn't affect the puppet price, except for I guess maybe there's an argument to like liquidity drain. But I think puppets is just like great marketing for the major puppets collection, right? Like that's like another way to like play the gender game if you want to, right? I mean, if an artist wanted to, it's just you just have like, female only collections that are like a separate thing that maybe have a smaller supply or whatever, but it doesn't fuck with the price action of the like primary, kind of male dominant collection.
There aren't obviously women puppets in either opium or puppets, but there are some that like one like references, like for example, there's one that talks about my husband. Well, that could be a man, but it also could be like the opium puppet version of a woman. And same with
Yeah.
this one on the floor right now, opium 54. It's bad bitch o'clock. Yeah, it's thick 30. And she also potentially is wearing like a pink hat. So it's not obvious, but I think the
A little
concern is
bit.
that this could be interpreted as a woman, which could
Yeah.
be impacting the price.
Which could impact the price, right? Because people don't want that's how I felt when I saw the bad bitch o'clock. I was like, what man wants to have like what man's like going to be super excited about owning bad bitch o'clock?
It's
Probably
same
not that
thing with
many.
my husband. Like unless you're gay, you're probably not going to want that.
So when you're buying that piece, you're buying it knowing that this is just going to be like a tradable floor situation. It's probably not, it's definitely almost certainly not going to be something that somebody buys intentionally unless they are a woman, which is just like a lower probability in the market.
Exactly. It just
Uh,
appeals to less people. It's like we talk about like it's like this concept that I talk about a lot. It's like you want things that are easy to like.
yeah, totally. Okay, so then should we get into, yeah, so have we covered all we want to cover on the like NodeMonkes puppets war? Is there anything? Okay, we've talked about opiums.
So
Oh,
the
pop
other
runes, rune pups, Jesus.
Yeah,
And then
no,
we
that's
can
the
get
other
into
piece. I think
runes.
that you've got this battle right now for like the preeminent meme token on runes, and I mean it's the runes conversation is a huge one, and maybe that's where we should go next.
I mean, I think
Um,
that like this whole, I mean, it really what I mean, and just to like close off the NodeMonkes versus puppet war conversation, it- puppets do just have like a bigger share of like the attention economy right now relative to NodeMonkes. NodeMonkes have this like commodity like kind of like potentially like a CryptoPunks kind of thing going on, this historical value. But like puppets, it's like you don't see like I mean, there are some derivative collections of NodeMonkes, but the derivative collections on puppets are like really going crazy. And I think Rune Pups are like a really good example of a particularly successful puppet derivative collection that's like just taken on a life of its own. There's really
yeah,
nothing like that in the NodeMonkes ecosystem.
yeah, no, and I think you and I have talked about it a lot. I think one of the big like distinguishing factors between puppets and node monks is that it's clear that the puppets community is just much more robust. It's growing much faster. And I think one thing that's interesting about that we've also talked about is this doesn't make me or us less bullish on node monks. The reality is that we still see the important place that node monks plays in Ordinals history and in terms of being likable art that the community really got behind. But I think that what we are saying about puppets is we see it as a higher risk, higher reward play than Node Monks. I think the chance that Node Monks crashes down to zero or near zero, I think is very low. I also think the chances of it 10xing from here are lower than the chance of puppets 10xing from here. So I think that that's the dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of this and there's also sort of the argument to be made like if you want to hold these, like which collection has a higher likelihood of surviving multiple cycles? Certainly Node Monks. Puppets, this trend could reverse at any moment, right? I mean, we talk about this a lot, right? Like when you have a really strong community driven, kind of trend driven, meme driven collection, the risk of course is that like it could kind of evaporate at any moment. Like that title can be taken from it. we don't see any obvious competitors right now for that title, but it could happen. Whereas like you can't really reverse the historical title. Like it just is what it is.
Totally. No, it and NodeMonkes, the fact that it's able to maintain this level of volume and maintain these prices without the what I would argue is the strongest community actually to me indicates the strength of the asset to some extent.
Word. Okay, cool. Okay, so then yeah, so let's get into pups or let's get into like rune. I called them rune miners, but like they're really like I don't know what we're calling them. These like
So
inscriptions that are yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I think you're not wrong in calling them rune miners. The reason that like I have been distinguishing between like Arsic and Runestone is because it's just the distribution is a little different in terms of like Arsic, the amount of the tokens that you're allocated depends on how long the miner is mining in your wallet, whereas Runestone is like a flat allocation just based on supply. And I think it's the similar with Rune Pups. Rune Pups is a flat allocation. So the inscriptions themselves, they represent like an allocation, but the inscription isn't like like the RSIC thing, they tried to say that the inscription itself is like a minor.
Which is why runestone and pups are outperforming the closer we get to the halvening, right? Because it's just like a flat out like whoever owns them in the moment that these runes are distributed will get the runes. Whereas like on the minor side, like it actually has to do with the time holding the inscription.
It's such a great point. Yes. And what you're seeing right now is um, Runestone is outperforming RSIC in terms of like straight inscription cost. But if you actually monitor the price of the underlying token that the RSIC inscriptions are mining, what you're seeing is that the price of the RSIC inscriptions is not going down fast enough for um, for the price of the underlying token to either go be flat or go down. It's going down so slowly or up in some cases that the price of the underlying RSIC token is going up. So there's been a lot of talk about Runestone being the most valuable runes project. The reality is that I don't think it's even close. I think that RSIC is by far the most valuable.
I'm so bullish on RSIC. I feel like this is like, okay, so this is like the good opportunity for us to talk about like our sort of general point of view about runes. So the major contenders at the moment, and this could obviously change as time goes on. It feels like it's rapidly evolving as we, in the moment. But the major contenders for like big runes tokens that we think could outperform post halvening are R6, rune stones, rune pups, Casey's token, which uncommon, remind me what it's called?
Uncommon goods.
Uncommon goods. And I mean, those are kind of the four major those are the four biggest contenders as far as we're concerned right now.
I think so. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that the two, from my perspective, it's really like, right now I'm focused on Runestone, Arsic, and Rune Pups. We've talked a lot about uncommon goods. I think it's an extremely exciting asset. I just think that because the mint mechanics are going to last for such a long period of time, I think the likelihood that um, it draws in a huge amount of volume and price action in this cycle, I think is relatively low.
Wait, R6, you just said?
No, uncommon goods. I meant that about
Oh,
uncommon
yeah.
goods. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, 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 my bad. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, this is the challenge with uncommon goods is that it's just distributing infinitely for the next 4 years. So you have no like functioning supply dynamic for a very, very long time. Is there like a universe? I mean, there is sort of like, I mean, basically what that means is like there's no reason to pay above the cost of a transaction to mint it yourself on the market. There's no reason to buy this token on the market for the next 4 years. There will be no reason to buy this token on the market for more than what the cost of a transaction is.
No, I don't think so. And
So
to that
appreciation
point,
will only come. That means that appreciation on the token will only come if fees go up on Bitcoin, if Bitcoin network fees go up.
in the short term,
Actually kind of interesting,
it is
which is
interesting.
it's basically a bet. You're basically betting that network fees are going to go up over the next 4 years. That's the only reason to like really make a big play for uncommon goods.
Which is a really interesting question. There's so much here to unpack that we can discuss. I guess the first thing I'd want to just before we get a little bit deeper into runes, just on the fee thing. So you've heard a lot of analysis about what's going to happen to the mempool and to the fee market. Um, with BRC20, which was, I would argue, just a huge success. Many have pointed out that it's not the most efficient in terms of uh, utilizing network resources, that it not only does each transaction use a lot of network resources, but a lot of transactions are necessary to use it. Runes is better in both of those ways. It's more efficient per transaction and you need less transactions. Um, you know, even under that dynamic with BRC20, highly inefficient, eventually the fees did come back down. Um, and I believe that it's likely to be the same thing with runes. I think that the way that the Bitcoin network is structured is it's obvious it's a fee market. And over time, I think that these more speculative use cases, it's not that people aren't willing to pay for them because they're not interested in the use case. It's that over time, it becomes obvious that it's just not profitable, and that the early people doing these things are the ones who made all the money. So the people coming to the party late that minted BRC20s, a month after the fact, it's like they tried to make money, but eventually they realized that they couldn't. Um,
Right. And there
so I
will be
think
just
that they're
like supply and demand thing going on where like people will literally just stop etching runes or whatever. People will stop minting runes rather if like depending on the price of fees, basically, depending on the price of network fees, and then they will start it again if there's like enough demand for secondary runes that it like supports, making transactions and paying the fees to just like actually mint them.
exactly. And this is similar to the way that the BRC20 sats traded. It became a bit of a proxy for network fees in the same sort of way. It was a situation where it minted for a really long time, um, and it was trading while it was minting for that period. So you had a dynamic where the mint cost affected the underlying token cost. And that was why for Unbroken Chain, for example, when we accumulated our Sats position, we were pricing that based on how much it would have cost to mint those. And the reason that at the time that it looked like a good trade to me, and Domo actually brought up that we should look at that trade, the reason it looked like a really good trade to me at the time was because the at that moment, the price of sats had crashed relative to the cost to mint them. So you could buy, I think we bought them for like a quarter of what it cost to mint them at that point.
Well, it also is sort of maybe that was like because I mean, we've been sort of scratching our heads like, why would Casey create like a token that, doesn't have like a clear supply dynamic in the short to medium term? Maybe this was his whole point. Maybe he wanted to have like, he wanted to navigate fees, he wanted to modulate fees. And this is like a way to do that, right? You're incentivizing people to mint or, etch when fees are low, basically, and you're disincentivizing people to etch or mint when fees are high. It's like it's actually a fee regulator on the network.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting.
So yeah, so I mean, so that's sort of what's so I mean, and ultimately what I will say is what this probably means is that there's going to be a lot of people minting and etching in the halvening block because they want to get early uncommon goods. But the reality of the situation is going to be the most expensive time to get them because that's when fees are going to be the most out of control.
Totally. But and I agree with that. And I think that the question then is like, is there a chance? And I think there is. I guess, is it likely that the early uncommon goods mints have some type of premium, like maybe the first 100 or the first 1,000 or the first
Those
10,000?
will be really competitive to get because everyone's going to be after them, right? So it's like you could end up spending a bunch of money on fees and be very far away from being in the first 100 or whatever. Like it's not going to be easy to get,
Totally.
that will be difficult. Like, and there's going to be so much luck involved in that, I think.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be like lotto ticket style.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting. And people have talked a lot about like um there's a lot of discussion right now in the ordinals community, which is great to see, about people getting nodes set up for the runes launch. And the reason for that is I believe that they're looking back on the history of what happened with BRC20 and the people that were ready to go to mint Ordi the minute that Domo announced the BRC20 experiment. And then from there, we're able to mint all the subsequent BRC20s. They look at that and people want to be prepared for that possibility. Um, I I'm we are prepared. Unbroken Chain is prepared. We have a node that's synced, updated with the most recent version of Ord. I've been brushing up on how to, use all the new commands and swapping out a new wallet that we can use for it so that we're all ready to go. But the reality of the situation is I'm a little bit skeptical that there's going to be even a remotely similar opportunity in terms of minting this stuff as there was with BRC20. I think that the difference, and it's a significant one, is because people knew that runes were coming, they were able to create all these distribution mechanisms to get them distributed already. So to the idea that you have to mint it to be a part of the earliest distribution for runes, it's just not the case. um and like projects like Arsic and Runestone, they're already being distributed.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
I guess I don't like, we're ready for it, and I'll be looking for opportunities of interesting things to mint out of the gate, but I'm just not necessarily sure that there's going to be a lot.
Well, I mean, somebody was asking, like, what's going to be like the first rune? Everyone's going to be fighting to get the first rune. And in my head, I'm like, there's already four, right? Like, there's already at least four ahead. Like, how interesting is a fifth, really, realistically?
Totally
So
agree.
yeah. Should we chat a little bit about R6 versus Rune? I mean, just a quick kind of TLDR on our point of view about R6 versus Runestones versus, I mean, Pups is just like, it is actually, well, we can talk a little bit about some of the challenges and sort of pros and cons of each of these three. Um, but maybe we should start with R6 versus Runestone, just like going chronologically. I mean, R6 is, I personally think like R6 are like grail runes. Like I think that they have the potential to be like the number one project easily. They're kind of like the front runner from my perspective in terms of what's going to be like the most valuable rune token out the gate. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you have a different point of view.
No, I don't. I share your view as well. I think I love RSIC. I think that um like so much about the way that that project was executed, I think was just really masterful. Um, I'm it was the innovation, and I think it's like hard to explain how big of a deal it was. What they essentially figured out is that you could give people a future allocation of runes before the technology was even ready. So they basically created the first runes distribution mechanism. And not only did they do that, but they did it from my perspective in a way that was like really thoughtful, really like well
Perfect.
executed. Yeah, it was really amazing. And then the last piece that I keep coming back to on it that I think is just so incredible is I don't know how they selected the wallets that they distributed it to, but I think one of the differences is Leonidas, and it's a great thing. He talks a lot about how Runestone is not focused on whales, and that's a good thing. He tried to develop it in a way that created a more equal distribution. The thing is that whales can be quite diamond handed. And I
Mm,
think that RSIC benefited from that. I think RSIC distributed it to people that their wallet demonstrates that they loved Ordinals.
yeah.
So it was brilliant across the board. It's like they found their like spirit animals on the blockchain, if you will.
Yeah, totally, totally. And that is, I mean, it's kind of like it makes sense to kind of have like I don't know if we want to call it like the common man's R6, like Runestone's kind of like the something that's more available to the masses, more accessible. And that's kind of like Leo's brand, right? Like I think that that's a demographic that he really like is committed to appealing to. So it kind of makes sense. I mean, that's a market need that needed to exist. but to your point, like much more paper handed, right? Like much more likely to sell. Um, yeah, I mean, and I think also I think we'd be remiss not to talk about the fact that they're creating three tokens. I don't know how we feel about this sort of three token distribution situation.
So the fund is long runestone. I will say that we accumulated ours at much lower cost basis than the current price. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was around 20% of where it's trading right now. Um, like we bought them right out of the gate, and we were airdropped about, I think, 15. So we got a decent amount airdropped. Um, as far as like the three token thing, the dog stuff, the reality is that I honestly I don't know how it's going to play out. I think
It is like liquidity. They are kind of, I mean, my concern about the three tokens thing is that liquidity is going to be distributed amongst three. This was like the issue when Casey thought that he was going to do 10 tokens instead of one, and he ultimately changed his mind, which I think was a good idea, was that you're diluting liquidity basically across multiple tokens, which means that there's no one strong token that potentially has the strength to like overcome other competition.
yeah,
It like weakens each of it, right? Like by like switching it into three tokens, each token is kind of weaker than like, I mean, like I think it like sort of made it any concern or like any kind of question about Runestone overtaking R6 as in the dominant position, I feel like has been quelled by this three tokens distribution strategy, in my opinion.
maybe, yeah, it's possible. And I also think that you're hearing, and I hate to say it, but I share it. You're hearing a lot of criticism about the name. And like my view is like Rune Stone was actually really cool. Like the 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 logo and the art was kind of interesting. It like evoked this like precious stone like communication with the past. Like it had, from my perspective, like it was like developing like a really like kind of like interesting, unique lore that was related to it. I think going in the dog direction, it just, from my perspective, like I just think it cheapens the brand a little bit. Like it becomes derivative when it was something really innovative. And I think, the other thing that I've talked about with you a lot, Isabel, about Runestone is like the 10K PFP collection, which really, it's like an Ethereum model, something that I think is like we've proven over time it works, people like it. I think one of the innovations that Leonidas brought to the table is he said, fuck that. Why don't we 10x that as like make supply a benefit? Because in this context, more supply means more people interacting with the project. So
And
I
to
think
their credit, it also supports distribution, right? So it's like you've got the diamond-handed whales holding R6, but you also have just like massive wallet distribution, which is bullish for the collection in general on the
totally,
Runestone side. Yeah.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm still, I think it's a nuanced thing. Um, Obviously I favor, and I think we both favor RSIC over Runestone, but I do think Runestone has done some interesting, things. And then the other piece that I think is that what it seems like Leo is trying to develop, and I give him credit for this goal, is he wants to create um like the asset that gets all the airdrops. So it's like, you own Runestone, you're getting dog, and now you're getting this, and now you're getting that. And it's like, it feels like an embarrassment of riches from owning it. And I think that that's the vibe that he's trying to give. And I understand that from like a market perspective.
Yeah. Rune Pups coming out the gate. That's like really like the last one that I think we're looking at really seriously of the sort of Rune adjacent opportunities that exist currently at this moment.
So I will,
Had an
I'll add one
amazing
to that.
weekend. Yeah. Oh, you'll add,
Sorry.
okay.
No, I do like Rune Pups, and we are long Rune Pups. The only other one that I've spent a lot of time on is the Game of Blocks
That's
uh
great.
project, and it's not necessarily super obvious that it's a runes project, but it is.
I didn't realize, yeah, I didn't even realize it was a runes project. I thought you were like, like basically like playing like an elaborate lottery to get like better inscriptions, essentially, get more
You
valuable.
are. So you got that part 100% right. then the third phase of this is those inscriptions each get allocated their rune based on the value within the game. And and on that, I'll say, there's an open question to me whether the runes they allocate or whether the inscriptions themselves are going to be more valuable. I don't actually know. I just want to explain what my strategy was on Game of Blocks really quickly, because I think it's kind of interesting. The first So there's multiple phases of the game. There are three phases of the game. The first phase was it's the risk phase. It was the phase where you risked your pieces that if you lost in risking them, they literally died and became worthless. If you won, you got some really valuable stuff. Each level of that, the first one was the lowest possibility of winning. You only had a 1% chance of winning. But if you did, you got what's called the Genesis inscriptions, and only 53 of those were given out in that phase. Those Genesis inscriptions not only are the rarest inscriptions in the collection by far, they also allocate like a huge disproportionate amount of the future rune to the holders. So it's very valuable to get these Genesis inscriptions, whether the collection inscriptions or the underlying rune becomes valuable. Whatever it is, you want the Genesis inscriptions, and there's only 53 of them, and there's 88,000 Game of Blocks inscriptions. So what I did was I tried to figure out, going into the first phase, how many we would have to risk to have a 90% chance of winning one Genesis.
Huh.
Um, and that's what we did. So
Huh.
we got lucky in that amount, because I was going for such high odds of at least getting one, we ended up winning two.
So
Um,
is this a mechanism that is preferential to whales? Also, I'll just say I heard through the grapevine that Brissy had a similar strategy. Is this like a strategy that like preferences people who basically can afford to buy enough of the blocks to play that kind of game?
Definitely. So I agree for sure. So I think the Game of Blocks, what I think was cool about it is that they airdropped all 88,000 of these for free. So anybody that got them could play. But if you wanted to actually play in a way where you were like,
Likely to win.
yeah, like it's not like thinking about it like a lottery ticket, but actually like a real strategy.
You need to have the
Like
money to play.
money,
Yeah.
yeah, and they were that first round, they were the most like the pieces went up a lot in value in that period because people were locking them down to play in that first round.
Right.
Um,
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Okay.
And
So
and
then
by the way, I just want to say I love that dynamic. The whole thing, everything about it. I just like I Game of Blocks, even though it's probably definitely the cheapest in terms of market cap compared to these other ones, it actually might be my favorite in terms of like game dynamics. I think it's just so fun and so interesting.
oh, word. I'm with you. Yeah, it sounds fun. Okay, so rune pups. So we'll like close the like rune miners, whatever we're calling them, rune inscription conversation by just like covering rune pups. Obviously, rune pups are like benefiting from all of this like puppet mania that's happening, generally speaking. But the other thing is because I mean, I personally am sort of like of the mind that like it's bullish that the runestone 3 token dilution, the supply issues with uncommon goods, are potentially bullish both for R6, but also potentially for rune pups, right? Rune pups might actually be end up competing with runestone just because of the dilution of the 3 tokens, potentially, if they keep going the way they're going.
I agree completely, and I
And
also
they have
think,
the puppet wind at their back. They have the puppet wind at their back on top of everything else, which is a big wind right now.
yeah, no, I think all those points are right, and I also think that like the dog thing, like it makes it like it so Runestone was so unique. I think going into this, now it's like another meme coin with a name like with an animal name like dog.
Right.
I think it the less differentiation it has, I actually think that value accrues to pups.
Yeah. Makes sense. Word. Um,
And the one quick thing I'll say about rune pups, which has been interesting. So the way that um it works is that Rune Pups is a future rune. It's also a current BRC20 token. The BRC20 token was dropped to puppet holders and opium holders, as well as the Rune Pups inscriptions. And then the way that the supply works is that 70% of the future Rune Pup supply is getting allocated to the holders of the BRC20 token, and then 30% of it is being allocated to the holders of the Rune Pups inscriptions. And then within the Rune Pups inscriptions, there's two categories. There's like the baseline piece, and then it's like an orange piece. And the orange piece was dropped to the opium holders, and the baseline piece was dropped to the pups holders.
Is it
And
10,000 and 777? So there's 10,000 white rune pup inscriptions and 777 orange pup inscriptions. So it was
correct.
1 for 1. It was
It
one
was one for
airdrop
one.
per. Smart. I love that they referenced opiums. That was also
And
very bullish for opiums. That's like one of the things that also got us very bullish about opiums is like just realizing how much the leadership cares about opiums, which we already knew, but it was validating.
100%. I think that this Rune Pups distribution, I think that it's an incredibly important point. What it does is it demonstrates how much the project leaders value opium.
Right. Even though this, I'm pretty sure Farmer Joe, who is the creator of Rune Pups, is not technically affiliated with puppets, but he is a lover of puppets, obviously, right? So he's not, technically affiliated with the puppets team at all. But like there's this again, it's that like grail sentiment. It's like the I call them like the real puppet lovers love opiums. Like that's kind of the vibe. How are the pups BRC20s distributed?
They were distributed to in the same way. They were distributed to the puppets and opium holders.
So I got puppets BRC20s that I didn't even realize that I had. So I have
If
been
you
mining pups.
if
I mean, I
if
have had
you if
puppets
you
the whole
held it
time.
at the right time, you should have, yeah.
Interesting. Cool. Okay. Um, word. Okay, so then I think maybe the only other thing, like the only other like major thing in our sort of like Q1 investor report that we haven't covered that I thought might be worth like chatting about is like 40, like BRC20, like the future of board, like everyone always is chronically asking me, what's your point of view, BRC20 versus runes? How are you guys thinking about BRC20 versus runes? Um, it's a very complex question that is sort of in ongoing evolution, especially because there's so much uncertainty with runes, and there's also a lot of uncertainty with BRC20 on the tech side, right? I mean, BRC20 is basically when this podcast comes out, they will be just about to, if not already just announced, um, programmability modules for BRC20 that we know that runes will not have, which I think people don't really understand, right? Because so many people coming to the ecosystem aren't really familiar with like underlying technical dynamics of how Bitcoin works. I think there's a real chance that people are sort of underestimating what's happening on the technical side with BRC20. Not because you couldn't do those things with runes, but because Casey just won't do it, right? I mean, Casey has no interest in making runes programmable and like, connecting it to some EVM or whatever. Whereas like BRC20, that's like a real possibility. Um, Even without an EVM, you could make theoretically BRC20 programmable. I mean, there's just a lot of, and again, without getting too much into the weeds about what that would look like. Domo and Lorenzo and Benari and the best in slot and Unisat team are actively working to develop BRC20 with the goal of making it BRC20. That does not seem to be Casey's goal. Lots of uncertainty. How are you thinking about BRC20 V runes or just BRC20 in general, the future of BRC20?
So I think and we touched on this before, I think it's pretty clear that the efficiency of runes is a lot more attractive in terms of each transaction being less of a load on the network, and then also needing less transactions to use it. I think both of those things are huge. Um, that said, I think that, we've seen like over the years, like a lot of token standards that have come up on Bitcoin and that people have tried to push. RGB, Taproot assets, liquid assets, root stock assets. Um, and the reality of the situation is that the community and the market doesn't always adopt um, what are like the technically best solutions. Sometimes the market has a mind of its own. Um, and that said, I think you're also seeing, um, because of runes to some extent, I think you're seeing all of this, forward motion happening on BRC20 in terms of functionality and progress. And I don't think that's going to slow down. I think that this race it's really good for both. Um, so I guess my view is that I don't necessarily view runes as bad for BRC20. I think in some ways I think it's gonna help BRC20 to sharpen its game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like I think like something we've spoken about a lot is like there's just so much liquidity coming into this ecosystem in general. Like there's going to be room for multiple token standards, even like just technicals aside. Like ultimately, like you're going to potentially see a universe where BRC20 does absolutely nothing, which it's not. I mean, they're working on a ton of stuff, but even if it didn't, there's a universe where Ordi just becomes this like historical, nostalgic meme coin, like the Doge of Bitcoin native assets.
Totally. My instinct um is that Ordi is not gonna go away. I think that to some extent, what I've talked about a lot is that I think um BRC20 as an ecosystem up until this point to some extent has really been people cycling their profits into Ordi from everything. And even we've done that to some extent. I had mentioned the Sats position that we had bought when it was cheaper um, to buy it than it was to mint it. Well, we're out of that position right now, 80%. We only have a very small portion left in the portfolio. So, being forthright, like we have lightened our BRC20 exposure going in to the runes, launch, but we are still long Ordi.
One challenge that we've spoken about before that I think is important to recognize just in terms of like the bearish case for BRC20 in general is if for some reason builders and developers decide that it's more useful or functional to be building with runes, and there's just not that many new projects or new tokens being put on BRC20 and BRC20 isn't seen as growing, then centralized exchanges won't be adopting BRC20. They won't put the effort into actually developing the infrastructure necessary to list BRC20. And that could potentially slow growth relative to something like maybe if there's a ton of growth with runes, centralized exchanges will list different runes tokens. And, over time that could, kind of diminish just user access to BRC20. I will say, however, if the BRC20 protocol team is able to create anything even in the ballpark of like programmability on the BRC20 indexing layer, and BRC20 is somehow seen as sort of like the DeFi mechanic, right? Like the token protocol, the Bitcoin native protocol that you can use for DeFi, that whole problem just evaporates, right? Because all of a sudden you're going to have like a billion DeFi apps working with BRC20 instead of runes because you actually have programmability at the indexing layer. So I mean, like it really could go either way. Like,
I totally agree. And I think that like, you're getting all this conversation right now about layer twos and everybody's talking about bridging to be able to do DeFi. I think that the market has demonstrated, and I believe that if we have the ability to, it will demonstrate even more that we, as a market, we would rather do these things natively on Bitcoin um, through indexers than bridging. So
yeah,
if we can create that functionality for BRC20, I think people will use it.
yeah, yeah, I think so too.
And then the last thing that I wanted to cover, and it's not, doesn't even, we can cut it out, is I wrote a review for this new Bitcoin hardware wallet called the Cold Card Q, which just came out, and I have it right here. And I just think it is the like I love Bitcoin hardware, I love Bitcoin software. And I'm just like really excited about this hardware wallet. I think it's like a huge step forward for Bitcoin hardware wallets in general.
It doesn't, we can't support ordinals with it though, right?
So not yet. So um Asigna, which Isabel, well, our people listening might not know them yet. Asigna is a a wallet that supports Ordinals and that is launching an Ordinals multi-sig product. And it's really a cool product. And I'm in touch with the team, and I won't say what they've told me about this, but what I can say is that on the Asigna website, there's now um, the option to have a Sparrow wallet being one of the contributing parts of a multi-sig. And if that is the case, that would mean that you could use the Cold card.
Oh, okay. Good alpha on the security front. I also just realized there was one like RSIC. Is this an RSIC? No, this has got to be a B. Dollar sign node is a BRC20.
$ node is a BRC20. Yeah.
Okay. That's getting some attention right now. Node Toshi just tweeted, we have no affiliation with dollar sign node, blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
It
dude,
crashed right after he tweeted that. I was
did he
watching.
really? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
It was
Okay.
like up to I think it was up to over 40 like 43 cents a piece, and then he tweeted that and it crashed to like 15 instantly.
He must be very happy with himself. Like,
I think
whoa.
it's recovered back to like 30. I think he's
I don't think he killed it.
no, I don't think he killed it.
I think in my mind, when I saw that, I was like, you're advertising, bro, but like, yeah, but I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 29 cents still. It's still
There was a
it's
buying opportunity in there at some point.
I we so we yeah.
Um,
We availed ourselves of it. I will say we bought that dip right as he announced that.
we did?
Yeah.
Oh my
Not for
God.
much, not for an amount that's going to matter for the fun, but like it just it seemed like a good trade.
Yeah. You're like, it's not dead yet. Okay, cool. Let me just like look over our investor report and see if there's anything else. Do we want to talk about uncommons? Uncommons are up. Uncommons were
Uncommons are
down. Uncommons, I was like nervous. I was getting nervous about uncommons. I was like, are they going to come back from the dead? What's happening? Like, they're not moving. Sat hunting has gone negative. Sat hunting isn't profitable anymore. And then they pounced over the weekend. I don't know what the catalyst was. I mean, do you have a perspective on that?
I don't know.
Supply dried up eventually because no one was sat hunting anymore. I mean, basically, most of the
I
sat
think
hunters
that's what it was.
stopped
I
that.
think so. We have a SAT hunter in the fund that basically takes our um, Bitcoin that we're not deploying at any given time and cycles it through the exchanges looking for the special sats. Um, at one point, that was generating like 150% APY for the fund. I mean, it was just fantastic. About 2 weeks ago, that went negative. Um, and
They turned it off.
as a result, we turned off our sat hunter, and looking at on-chain data, it appears many others did as well, which basically creates, like you said, Isabel, less supply coming into the market. So I do think that that's likely what it is. And so the prices were all the way down to 70 or 90, I believe, $90 per uncommon. And that's when it became very clear that everybody was shutting off. Well, the price popped all the way up to 150 and now it's back down to 115. So what's clear is that it went up to 150, people started turning back on.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's just, I mean, this is like it is kind of like Bitcoin mining, sat hunting, right? I mean, it's like a real, sort of and creates very efficient markets, right? Like you just have like a clear, like supply, like on off kind of valve.
Totally. And I think the reality is the price can't really crash that much below the cost because people can't afford to sell it that unless they're getting liquidated like as an entity. Most of the time, you're going to have people that are going to be trying to make profit from this. So I think that the situation is that there's a bit of a floor that's getting put in here.
Also, somebody had mentioned to me and I forget who mentioned this to me and who to attribute this to, but somebody said that they thought um, that most of uncommon sat hunters were keeping the sats for themselves, but that must not be entirely true because like obviously people are caring about what the market prices are. Or is it just that like they can buy them, if they can buy them cheaper, they're not going to hunt them?
That's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So do you think it's like do you think most people who are sat hunting, I mean, is your impression that most people who are sat hunting are actually holding the majority of their supply?
It's a
Majority
good
of their
question. I don't know. I think there's a mix. I think it's a pretty healthy mix. I think you have some people who are doing it as a straight yield opportunity and are just extracting as much as they can in terms of yield. Excuse me, meaning they're selling the sats straight into the market. I think you have, and I've encountered some people, a lot of people like that. I think you have a group of people who are doing it to mostly just accumulate these things as cheaply as they can as a trade, as a longer term trade. And then I think you have people that are sort of in the middle. They want to accumulate them, but they also want to cover their costs.
makes sense.
So,
Okay,
so the
cool.
reality is that very few people can, you know, like we view, um, like we view the fact that we like when we don't sell them to cover our costs, we just view that as the accumulation cost of accumulating those sats. And for us, that's the cheapest way to get them. And it makes a lot of sense, but not everybody has those same like economics.
Yeah, makes sense. Word. Okay, cool. I think we've pretty much covered like our main touch points on like uncommon sats, runes, inscriptions. We haven't talked about shrooms in a hot minute. Do you have a point of view? Shrooms are just sitting at 2 Bitcoin, just hanging out. And I have a feeling a lot of people bought them from Shroom Toshi, like primary sale at like 1.5. So I don't really see them going. I mean, do you see people selling shrooms below what they bought them for? I doubt that. They had to have been collectors that were like sophisticated enough to get the introductions to Shroom Toshi and like to like be,
I don't,
soft.
so I think that that was out there for pretty much anybody. My view of shrooms right now, it's the grailiest grail of ordinals. There's no doubt about it. I think the amount of supply that got sold at once, um, it's creating a bit of a supply overhang at these prices around 2.2 to 2.25. And what I've noticed, and it might be turning around right now, but what I've noticed is you're just getting more and more sellers coming into the market, and more of these are for sale. And as long as that's the dynamic, I don't think price rockets up yet. I think there's a supply overhang that needs to get eaten up first.
I like that Sig hash one. I would maybe think about making an offer on that one. I think that one's cool.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, like the other like floor ones are like pretty meh, but like that one's actually cool. We'll cut this part.
Yeah. I really like the A16Z one. I think it's so good, but it's way over floor.
Also, that one, like it's unclear how that one will like hold over time, right? Because A16Z, people might not even remember or know what that is. Sig hash is like protocol language.
So I think the A16Z thing, first of all, they're huge. They're not going anywhere.
You
It's the
don't think
lar
they're going anywhere in like multiple cycles?
No, I mean they're the biggest venture organization in the world. They're huge. They funded everybody, including like all the big tech companies that have nothing to do with crypto. But like what I think that what I and we don't have to buy it or anything. I was just saying what I think it is it's like it's showing the venture funds as like thieves essentially like stealing value from the ecosystem. And I think that that is like
An
like
important
for us
message.
like that is sort of our view, like we're like a hedge fund, like we don't really like the venture guys.
I know. I think we are venture funds. People think that people like get us confused with venture funds all the time. People are always like shilling me their companies. I'm like, we don't invest in companies.
Yeah, we're
Listen,
not venture.
we're not venture. This is a PSA. We're not venture. I tweeted
Yeah,
about it.
exactly. I want to we should add to our Twitter profile not venture,
Not
not
venture. We should. Yeah. Word. Okay. All right. So yeah, so maybe we get that. I mean, do you think it's worth putting an offer on the Sig hash one? That
yeah,
one's probably worth
I'll put an offer in on it for